Welcome to the WanderLearn Show. I'm your host, Tapon. I'm here with Nejc Trušnovec, who is from Slovenia, and I've had him on a few times on the podcast. We've talked about Ukraine quite a bit. Okay, well, I hope the connection is not going to be too choppy because somehow Slovenia used to be an advanced country. I guess you guys are losing it.
Yeah, we are dropping in the rankings.
Here we are in November 2023,
Mhm.
the war in Ukraine right now. You had originally been pretty bullish, and you were right.
Mhm.
A lot of people predicted the quick and fast demise of Ukraine with regard to Russia in days or weeks. You were contrarian, and you were right. They were able to not just resist, but also to push them back quite a distance. But now we find ourselves in about a stalemate, it seems like, for
Yeah.
most observers. And I
Mhm.
imagine you agree. And so,
Mhm.
and you had been predicting that a little bit more optimistic take
Yeah.
that I think by now you would expected more progress. So what's your
Yeah.
reflections as of now?
You're correct. So I predicted that by the end of this autumn, at the start of winter, Ukraine will already retake the lost areas. So the southern front, they would go to Mariupol, and they would be able. I said that they would be able to isolate Crimea. I said that they would take the northeastern part already. So I was too bullish in my predictions. There are three reasons for them not for Ukrainians not succeeding in that. You were actually right. You said, yeah, but the West might just trickle just enough stuff to Ukrainians to not for them not being able to win the war, and for them just to hold on and really push on slowly, so as to not um, enrage or Putin too much, and so that the nuclear war wouldn't start. And so this was like a conspiracy theory you mentioned, if I remember correctly. And I think I said that, yeah, that was historically a case when the US would not provide enough material for the outright win for the Allied armies. And it happened again. I mean, I was quite disappointed when I realized that the amount of help, supplies, and everything that is coming from the West is not enough on the scale that would be needed for the Ukrainians to push through. It was way less than it was needed. That was the first thing. So looks like the West plays this game of providing just enough so that Ukraine doesn't lose, but not provide too much so that Russia outright loses, because Russia outright losing makes for a very dangerous case of potential nuclear confrontation. So I think this is a game that shouldn't be played by the West. This is my personal opinion, because all the red lines that were crossed until this point from by Ukrainians and by the West haven't really proven to be red lines at all. So the only ace in the sleeve that Russia has is the nuclear potential that they have. But my I think it is possible for the Russians to press the button, but the stalemate that is going on is on the long run not good for the democracy in the West and for all the current global system that is established at the moment. So things are changing now. So if Ukraine doesn't prevail, doesn't take all the land, it means that will give a huge incentive for all the other authoritarian regimes out there, mainly Xi Jinping, with his eyes firmly set on Taiwan. So, for example, if Taiwan is not properly stocked up with deterrent weapons and systems, then he might do that, and so the world will be even more engulfed in the conflict than it is now, with the war in Israel and Gaza that we'll talk about later. So yeah, this was one thing, not enough weapons. Then the other thing was, it turned out that the defenses that Russia put in the south were actually much better designed than originally thought. They were done by the General Surovikin. This is a Russian general which after the revolt went out of the scene, he was basically deposed because I think he was suspected of collaborating with the Wagner group. So he's the one of the smartest generals they have, one of the better ones. Still, with the mentality of hammer and hard knock hammer situation for the Russian army. So not a very delicate, subtle general at all, but a very smart one, and he managed to basically delay the Ukrainian offensive. So it was mostly not enough proper weapons for the Ukrainians. And then second thing was this defense system that Surovikin set up was very very nicely done, which managed to basically stop Ukrainians quite on many places. And also the terrain is basically similar to the terrain that Allies faced in Normandy. We have a lot of like fields with hedgerows, with areas where you can set up very good defense, as Russians are clearly doing. Um, and yeah, so things didn't pan up the way they should have. And the third thing was Russia actually, besides making this great defensive system, created an offensive in the east, which made the Ukrainians had to put all their experienced troops on that areas, so not on the south. So the Ukrainian troops that attacked in the south were actually unexperienced troops, but they were being trained by the West. But being trained by the West on its own doesn't mean that you can be immediately successful. They lacked proper equipment. They faced a really good defensive system. They faced also natural barriers in the shape of hedgerows, similar to the ones like they were in Normandy's landings, and all these things stacked up. But still, you would have a lot of in the public eye a lot of negative opinions about, yeah, I mean, the expectations were really high, maybe too high also on my part, and so the disappointment in this case is and was bigger. But still, Ukrainians are managing to degrade Russian army a lot. I mean, crazily a lot. At this point, Russians are resorting to just human wave attacks without properly being supported by tanks and planes and so on. So they have to resort to head-on attacks, which are by now clear in Avdiivka area, for example, where they've spent thousands of personnel, poorly trained guys, just going straight on against the Ukrainian defensive systems. And it was quite terrible to watch. And of course, terrible to watch. What imagine being there on the Ukrainian side or on the Russian side, having to face those defensive systems and just having to go straight on without as much artillery support as before, because Russian artillery support really dwindled now. Their ammo stocks are now on par with what Ukrainians have. For a short amount of time, I think the Russians managed to stabilize this by procuring ammo from the North Korea. uh, Surprisingly, North Korea um, was able to send them a lot of ammo, which stabilized this part for the Russians. But still, they are roughly on par with what Ukrainians have. And I think at the start of the war, Russians had about 8 times more in the ammo count and in the artillery count than what Ukrainians had. So this is why Ukrainians specialized in just trying to really hit the targets precisely, while Russians opted just for the straight on uh, huge area bombardment and seeing trying to hit something with just a huge barrage, which didn't pan out so well for the Russians. But yeah, it's still, I mean, all the Western guys who enlist in the Ukrainian army who fight there, so experienced guys who had veterans also. Would say that it's Russian artillery is still a scary thing, and number one killer in Ukraine still.
What do you think is your predictions for 2024?
Now it's getting a bit tougher to predict things with certainty. So the stalemate could continue, but on the other side, Ukrainians are managing really to deplete Russian army a lot. So Russian army has a lot of available personnel that they can mobilize, doing their it's called, I think it's called crypto mobilization, when it's not officially recognized the mobilization is going on, but actually it is going on. So guys left and right would get notifications about having to enlist. um, Still, the major populations in the two major cities in Moscow and the other major city are not getting these enlistments on a large scale, because those are still the areas which Putin is afraid to put pressure on from a militaristic point of view. So he's basically doing this. He's enlisting minorities throughout the Russia, which are proving to be a pain in the neck anyway for him. So he's basically just doing genocide across his own country. He's clearing the younger population of all these ethnicities that are spread around the poorer Russian regions. And all those guys, I mean, for them, enlisting in Russian army is quite lucrative, because um, they get a lot of money also for getting killed. Family gets rich for their economical situation. So if you get killed, your family gets quite a better footing in the society. But also the wage is great. So yeah, they enlist. They are, of course, most of them, they don't realize how serious the situation is in Ukraine, and most of them die in 1 month's time after they enlist. So yeah, it's terrible for Russian guys, a terrible situation. So internal ethnical cleaning is being done by Putin, and when he runs out of those guys, he will have to then um, press the population pool that is more dangerous for him. So the more conscious population pool, not the poor, just the poor guys who are, have nothing to lose if they, besides their life, if they enlist. So yeah, um, it that's going to be hard to see pan out. But I think Ukraine is going to degrade Russia even more. For example, their fleet has been decimated. They had to relocate their fleet to a more safer port in the Russian land, so not in the Crimean port. Um, Still, Ukrainians are much more advanced technologically, in the sense that all their society is working towards this goal of being able to win, while on the Russian side there's this huge apathy. And although the whole economy is now on the war footing, it's a war economy going on, they are still not able to produce what they need, especially not the more like I predicted, the more technologically advanced stuff, because that was always something that they relied on importing from the West. What is happening now is, of course, China is ramping up its underground connection with Russia, and of course Iran is stepping up, and now the borders are clearly ramping up with also the war in Gaza with Israel. So you have Russia-Iran axis, with China being more subtly connected there, and of course North Korea supplying Russia with their ammunition in exchange for more highly advanced technological stuff that they are lacking themselves. Um, and we'll see how it goes. So if Iran manages to ramp up the whole Gaza war, it already managed to include the Yemeni rebels, so the Houthis, and if the war spills in Lebanon, if Syria is also more actively included in the war. And if all their proxies that they have enter the war, and if China decides to actually step up more actively, then all hell is going to break loose. So yeah, we are on the dangerous position at the moment. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but definitely, I mean, the allies, the US, can get oversaturated with events throughout the globe, and so they will not be able to provide as much assistance as they did before to Ukraine. Um, yeah, so we'll see how it goes. But I think that Ukraine still has the upper hand in this story, and that Russia is going to have a huge problem. And if you remember, I also predicted that Putin is going to be deposed, and it almost happened with the rebels, so the paramilitary rebels, the mercenaries rebelled with Prigozhin in charge. But that was just top of the iceberg. Basically, part of the military was just silent and was basically observing what will happen. And so, if Prigozhin with his military group would be successful, if enough military generals on the Russian side would go on his side, then they would also step on his side, and then that would be the end for the Putin. But he was unsuccessful. Looks like not enough. He didn't have enough sway, and so he had to step down. And ultimately, he was assassinated by Putin, um, uh, aptly by being shot down from the air. Yeah, so my prediction about Putin being deposed almost came true, but it didn't happen in the end. And I was wrong about Ukraine's being able to, with the Western help, being able to take all the land in the northeast and in the south. So yeah, that I was spectacularly wrong in that. And but I still think that I'm right about Ukraine winning this conflict, and the stalemate might go further. Of course, we are talking about the whole year of 24 now. We'll see if who wins with elections in the U.S. If the side which does not support Ukraine wins, then Ukraine is going to have much bigger problems than it is facing now. Definitely. Yeah, so it's a bit foggy now at the moment.
Do you think Putin will stay in power throughout 2024?
He basically made his position stronger now that he won this rebellion. He managed to stay. He had to have an upper hand in this. So always when this happens, things kind of entrench for those guys. So he has lesser possibility of being deposed now. But still, if Ukraine manages to take these lands, and especially if Ukraine manages to snatch off Crimea, then Putin's days are numbered. Yeah. But when this happens now is not so clear, because I put too much stock in the early summer offensive, which didn't pay as much dividends as I hoped it would. Yeah, so now it's turned into a positional war, similar to what First World War was. So now it's a war of attrition, and the side which manages to kill off more soldiers and take away more economical means from the enemy is the winner. So if West stops providing support for Ukraine, then slowly Russia will get an upper hand. Although it's lacking all the equipment it needs to do so, but I mean all the mass waves of guys who are marching towards the Ukrainian positions cannot treat a lot Ukrainian army, because yeah, the Russia has a huge personnel pool still available for them. They have crappy equipment. Their equipment is now being like Russian army has equipment from the 50s also now. They are lacking transportation. They are lacking tanks. They are now low on ammo stock. Their artillery, their guns are being depleted, because if you are constantly shooting and not properly providing for them, they get depleted too. And of course, Ukraine is doing a terribly great job at sniping off Russian equipment, and so they're being degraded. And at the moment, they don't have any smart generals or any smart headquarters leading them. The ones who were smart are actually the post now. Those were, I think, collaborating with Prigozhin at the time of rebellion, and they were all the post. Like the guy, Surovikin guy, was basically, I think, on spot with. He was collaborating with Prigozhin at the time, and so why he's smart in quotes is because he made a really good defense line in the south, and he was able to lead the Russian army quite well. But then, because of the internal bickering, he was deposed, he was reassigned, and then I think he had this resentment towards the leading Russian, well, the headquarters of the Russian army, and so he tried to basically play this game of not outright supporting Prigozhin, but I think it was later discovered that he was with Prigozhin, at least partly supporting him. So he was just now silently removed.
Israel and the whole
Mhm.
war in the West Bank uh, and Gaza, well, it's actually mainly Gaza.
Yeah.
How's that going to affect the Ukraine war? Some people say it's going to be good news because the Republicans who normally support Israel and are not
Yeah.
that enthusiastic about supporting Ukraine, they're
Mhm.
going to be able to do these package deals, like, in other words, a joint military package and somehow linking the two. And people want to unlink them, but some analysts say, well, I think most people say it's bad news for Ukraine, but some people say, no, 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 it's actually good news because then it's going to combine the Republicans and Democrats.
I don't have a clear-cut idea on this. At the moment, the way this conflict is limited, I don't think it hurts Ukraine too much. Um, but if it spreads, if the whole Middle East goes up in fire, then of course that is detrimental for Ukraine a lot. So at the moment, I think the two conflicts are really connected, because Russia is clearly on the side of Hamas. It's propping up all the cracks that it can in the West, and Hamas doing harm and being just one of the active conflicts is basically playing towards the Russian goals. Still, I don't think the Hamas Gaza Israeli war plays a big role here, because Russia, US is stocked so much on these old 30 years plus weapons and weapon systems they can easily, send to Israel, to Ukraine, and easily repleting them with new stuff. So the danger here is on the political side. So politicians should say, yeah, but look how many billions of dollars we are spending supporting Ukraine and Israel. While in truth, it's not that, because that money was already spent for the production of that equipment. What US is doing now is just sending that equipment away and basically reactivating its own military engine to produce new stuff, more modern stuff, which invigorates the economy and so on. Also, there's a lot of lend lease going on, which is also positive for US. So, but this is very easily spinned in the negative way for the internal US public. So, yeah, if it turns against it, then yeah, problems are going to happen for Ukraine. Yeah. But so, what's my take on this war? I mean, it's of course not so clear cut as the war in Ukraine. Um, but then again, I mean, I think the Israelis still have the moral high ground here. The problem is, of course, the crazy amount of civilians which get killed in Gaza. But so far, nobody had made any smart suggestion of how Israelis should do this, of deposing Hamas without causing so much casualties on the civilian side. I mean, it's terrible. And also the numbers, are we to believe the numbers that Hamas puts out? No, of course. But again, it's clear that many civilians are suffering and dying there. And this is, again, very easily spinned against the West, against the US, and against Israel. And of course, Russia is really liking these kind of scenarios, because then they can even widen the cracks in the Western world even more.